Now, another aspect of this is also how it affects your neurology. As I says, one half of your hemisphere of your brain, the right hemisphere of your brain, it's not switched off, it's just not doing what it should be doing, okay? And it's something that I'm quite worried about, especially since they discovered in neuroscience that you actually, when you use parts of your brain, it actually builds new cerebral partitions. So for instance, if I was giving piano lessons here tonight, on the next few months, and we were practicing on that piano, as all of you are learning how to play the piano, your brain is now building new cerebral partitions and new neural pathways to actually learn how to use these skills. And that's because you're learning a new skill. The same with anything, even in engineering process. Every time you learn something new, a new neural pathway is built in your brain. It's like a new section hooked onto a computer. I mean, it's just amazing stuff when you think about it. Now, if our right brain is not being properly utilized, we're losing something big time here. We're losing an ability here, and we may be actually losing it in a genetic sense as well. Now, legendary neuroscientist Wilder Graves Penfield, known as the greatest living Canadian, who devoted his brilliant lifelong career to understanding the functioning of the mind, as well as Sir John Carew Eccles, the Australian neurophysiologist, who won the 1963 Nobel Peace Prize for his work on the synapse, both came to the same conclusion: you're not in your brain. You're not in there. We are not in our brains. We're not inside them. There is not a neuroscientist on this earth who can actually prove that we're living inside our brains. What they'll say is, well, of course you're in your brain, because like when you just gave an example of it earlier on when you spoke about the left and right brain being under the magnetic resonance machine. You just proved it. And I said, no, that's only at the point of observation at the moment it's happening. Where did the memories come from? They can't find where memories are stored inside the brain. It seems to arrive from somewhere outside yourself, and your brain acts like a TV or a radio tuning in a channel. That seems to be what the current, well, that's what it is. And they begrudgingly do accept that. Now, there are neuroscientists who say, no, it's all rubbish. It's everything about you is in your brain. It's not. It's not. We're tuning in ourselves. We're like, you literally think of yourself as your brain and your nervous system as a walking radio. And this is a walking radio that's allowing you to walk around inside this five-sense reality. And you're tuned into certain frequencies, and you're tuned into certain bandwidths of vision. For instance, we can't see infrared. We can't see ultraviolet. We don't have as good hearing as, say, cats. We don't have as good eyesight as, say, an owl. So we're living within a specific bandwidth of perception, and we're tuned into this reality. But guess what? You can actually tune yourself out much further. That's what I was talking about, those altered states. That's what happens. When somebody has an accident and they have an out-of-body experience, and they suddenly talk about feeling a sense of universal love, right, or something like that, what they're really doing is they're changing their bandwidth from that to that, and they're seeing so much more of reality. But because we are processed into a left-brain reality, we have been tunnel visioned down into a certain thing. This is why, when you become more creative and more artistic, you see the world in ways you never ever imagined. And I'll talk about that but the human brain, nervous system, and five senses are a complex organic broadcasting and receiving system which controls our perception and nature of reality. Now, this is an important one. It controls our perception of this reality and how we see it, but it also controls the reality as well. It's like a user and a taker, a giver and a receiver. It does both, orchestra and conductor. And this is because it's been shown through quantum physics, through the Copenhagen experiment, that your actual observations can change the nature of reality in subatomic particles. However, it's not easy. So people will tell you, oh, I just have to wish something that will come true, and it will come true. It won't, it's not like that. It takes a lot of work because the subatomic particles are so densely packed that for one human being to actually change the nature of reality takes years and years and years of actually work and tension and working on it. It's so locked, but occasionally it does happen by accident. A classic example is a very common story you'll hear of a car accident, and a mother sees her child trapped under a 2-ton car, and she lifts the car up and pulls her child out. Where did that strength come from? And they all say, where did that strength come from to make her do that? Well, the strength came from nowhere. What she was, her focus on saving her child had taken away the weight of the car. She had changed matter. The car didn't weigh 2 tons because the 2-ton weight of that car was less important than the survival of her child. So every so often you'll hear a story like that of someone who has this reality defying experience, and it's usually shock and trauma, unfortunately, that has us do that. It's the same thing when people can walk on hot coals. These people who can put pins and needles and all, they can do all these things. It's not because they have a broken nervous system. They found a way to switch these things off. The power of the human mind is awesome. It's actually creating the whole universe. Now, epigenetics, as I said last night, is the ability to switch on gene sequences that are not hereditary. This is an important one for the creative process as well, because you ever hear the expressions thinking creates a stinking life, negative thoughts create a negative life. These are very important concepts to grasp, because we have to understand that what you do think and what you do process will actually become your reality. So you've got to be very careful of how you think. Now, epigenetics is the study of heritable changes in gene expression or cellular phenotypes caused by as yet undetermined mechanisms other than changes in the underlying DNA sequence, including modifications to the genome that do not involve a change in the nucleotide sequence. In 2011, it was demonstrated that the metabolization of mRNA has a critical role in human energy homeostasis, maintaining internal stability and stimuli which would tend to disturb its normal functioning. I'm reading this for a reason, and this has finally been given credibility to the emerging fields of epigenetics. All that gobbledygook there I got from, all those words I got from a medical journal. You know what they basically say? Put it in clear language, what you think will actually change your DNA. You can actually change your DNA by thinking it, by thoughts. They said, as yet unknown stimuli or unknown causes, the reality is they're thoughts. You can think something and it will change your DNA. It will actually switch on dormant gene sequences, and it can switch off negative gene sequences. And this is the biggest project at the moment in genetics, and they're keeping it quiet because they had spent all this money, billions and billions and billions of dollars, on something called the Genome Project. It started in the 1980s, and what they intended to do was to map the entire human genome trait, everything, and have all these genes, so they could actually, when you were born, they could take a sample and they could say things like, well, you're going to get multiple sclerosis when you're 21, you're going to have this disease, you're going to have arthritis by the time you're 40. And you know what they found? Are you going to be a criminal? I mean, that's quite a frightening one that they actually could have. That's just this future crime kind of thing. Guess what they found? And they're keeping it quiet, is that they found that your genes have no hereditary traits in them. You actually get them from thinking about them. So if your mother has arthritis at 30, you'll get arthritis at 30 because you're expecting it. And you'll switch on those gene sequences. And they showed the genome, in terms of personality especially, was a complete failure. Professor Steve Jones of University College London, he wrote a phenomenal article in the New Scientist tearing the Genome Project apart. He says we've discovered nothing about the genes. They're a bigger mystery than ever. The Genome Project was a failure. Let's stop it. So of course they didn't stop it, because then epigenetics came along and they realized that genes were actually changed by expressions in different ways. They've now started an epigenetics genome project. And I spoke to Professor Kevin Dutton, who wrote a book on psychopathology, and he's now saying, the language they use is incredible. They'll say things like, well, we don't know yet, but this is what the truth is. You understand? We don't know yet, but this is what the truth is. So I steal your wallet. You see me stealing it, right? And I put it in my pocket, and you say to me, can I have my money back? well, you don't know if I've stolen it yet. But let's have a discussion about it. And this is what happens. And this is how they slow the process down. They slow the process down because when they encounter something that blows their minds, they say, we're going to have a study, and then they lock it up for years. And then they might begrudgingly admit it years later, very quietly. The Genome Project has actually been a failure. And it's been a failure because and the proof it's a failure is corporations have taken their money out of it. Because they had invested vast amounts of money in all these biotech industries, believing that one day they could actually have a whole new biotech sector that would appear based on the idea that your genes determined every aspect of your life, everything from criminality, law enforcement, medications, big pharma. Turned out it wasn't true. And when corporations no longer give you money, then you know there's nothing in it. So the Genome Project showed that. So what it showed was that you're in control of your own genes more than you realise. So you better start looking after your genetics in the same way you start looking after your body and you start looking after your mind. Because you can actually change them, and you can do this through creativity. You can actually create a better life for yourself by imagining things, but you can also purge. This is going to be a very important part of this. You can purge issues and problems from your life too. That's very important. Now, this is just the next segment. Someone say something?
We don't know what it means. Purge. The Norwegian word.
Purge.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, interrupt me when I say purge, remove, take it out. A snake bite. Purge. No, remove the toxins. Remove the poison. Get it out of you. Now, this section is part of another slideshow, but I included in this called The Until Soul, and I did a discussion in front of a group of psychiatrists in Dublin on the relationship between mental illness and creativity. And of course, I brought up a certain artist, and Vincent van Gogh. He was a man who sold one painting in his life. And he's generally considered the greatest, if not the greatest painter of all time, or one of them. But he sold one painting in his life, which is very sad. And the reason why was he saw the world as it really is. He was one of those unique individuals who doesn't see the world as how you're told it is, but how it really is. And he's someone that I've read a lot of his writings and stuff, and he comes across as this very kind, compassionate, loving person. And his love for humanity was so deep that it probably destroyed him, because he was one of these people who wanted to heal the world and heal everybody to the point where it couldn't help him, and it sent him into spirals of depression and madness. But at the same time that he was at his darkest, he was painting paintings that were incredibly bright, that were like never seen before, uses of blues and yellows in particular. And he would paint these incredible swirls, and we've all seen his artwork. It's stunning, and in little pieces. Now, I have a theory that one of the things that they said he was having, he was going mad. Yes, maybe he wasn't well, but on the other level, I actually believe he was having an expansion of consciousness, and he was opening up that limited bandwidth, and he would talk about visions and seeing things. Okay. He was a madman at the time. He was committed to a psychiatric hospital, or a mental hospital asylum in the south of France. And he painted paintings that today are considered just, like Starry Night and all these other paintings, like crows in a cornfield, that are considered like masterpieces of Western art because they painted the human soul for the first time. Prior to this, you still had the Impressionists like Monet and Degas and those people. They still painted kind of realistic scenes. Generally they were realistic, but he was the bridge between the art of the Renaissance, strict mathematical formats, realistic portrayals of human beings, reality, that kind of idea, the classical idea of art. You paint really a photograph or what you see. But he was the first one to kind of become, well, he wasn't the first, but definitely definitely the one of the most impact, to paint his soul. He wasn't painting crows in a cornfield, he was painting Vincent van Gogh's soul. And this painting shows, it was actually I think the last painting before he killed himself, and it shows the dark crows leaving the yellow cornfield that's about to be harvested. And what he's really showing here, that he's ready to go. He wants to dispel the darkness from himself. And that's what the crows represent. And the cornfield represents life, fertility, the soul. He wasn't painting a picture, he was painting a sort of like a psychological, almost esoteric insight into the man. And this is why his artwork is so powerful to this day. And that's why people are so moved by his paintings. Even if they first look at that and they just see a bit of blue and a bit of yellow, there's such emotion in them because he was able to put the soul of his pain into pigment. In fact, during a particularly bad nervous breakdown, he was found by the doctor, who actually encouraged him to paint, squeezing tubes of cadmium yellow paint into his mouth, almost like an antidepressant. He was trying to make himself feel better by swallowing yellow. I mean, that's a very sad statement and a very sad story to think about. But you see, that's the only way he could explain to people how difficult his internal struggle was. Now, William Blake was another one who was a wacko, a crazy wacko, right, in his day. He suffered from what we would call bipolar disorder now. Extreme mood swings of very, very depressing, up to highs of this kind of thing. And he used to experience hallucinations. He used to see angels above his house in England. He grew up in London. Now, he was, at the time, a very different kind of person as well. He was producing an art. These paintings are nearly 200 years old. And this is probably not the best one. This is his image of Isaac Newton, the famous mathematician. But basically, the artwork that he used was almost like what modern comic book artwork is. You can see it has that style, very, very different for its time. Very, very radical. On top of that, he was a brilliant poet. He was also a wonderful humanitarian. So one of his poems talks about the chimney sweep boy. In England at that time, little boys could be actually bought off their parents at like 7, 8, 9 years old, and actually used as slaves to go up chimneys to clean them in the big houses. But when these kids were not taken care of, they were chained like animals on the street. They would put a chain around their necks and chain them to a wall. The chimney sweep would treat them in the same way he would treat his brushes or his buckets. They were just an object. And that's because the people all around them, that was normal. Just like slavery would have been normal. They saw that was normal. But because Blake was an artist, he had a higher level of compassion than the people around him. And he understood, this is a poor child. You cannot treat a child like this. At the time, that was considered radical. Like, oh, it's just a poor child, a poor peasant, it doesn't matter. And yet he saw that. He even wrote, and the most amazing thing of all was, for someone who was considered such an outcast of his time, he wrote a poem called Jerusalem. And that's actually now considered the unofficial anthem of England. Now, God Save the Queen is the anthem of Great Britain. But the unofficial anthem of England, the country of England, is a poem that he wrote called Jerusalem. Very beautiful, turned into a very beautiful song. And again, an idiot in his time, nobody liked him, they didn't like his art, he was a radical, he was a weirdo, he was annoying. But today, the name William Blake is mentioned in England, it's like, oh, William Blake, a great national hero. Again, creativity makes you see the future before it comes. And at the time, there's a revulsion. People hate you for it. But you know what? They hate you because you've held up the mirror to them and you've said to them, this is how you really are. And you don't like it, but that's how you really are. Now, Sylvia Plath was an American poet. She died in 1963. Unfortunately, also committed suicide. But she was also in a very torturous relationship. But she had a very painful and a very difficult life. She was a tortured soul, but her poetry is astounding. It's just beautiful. Again, we're getting an insight into her through her poetry. Now, I went to visit her grave in England. She committed suicide and was buried in this place called Hepston Stall, which is in Yorkshire. And it's literally a small empty graveyard on the top of a remote bleak hill. Really quite strange place for someone so famous to be buried. But it was fitting too as well, because it was also the same place that all the Bronte sisters novels took place on, which is so funny because it was the synchronicity there. So I went to visit her grave, and she wrote this poem called Lady Lazarus, about like all the time she tried to kill herself and survived. And she tried to find a reason to keep on going. Because she had she had this bipolar thing where extreme highs, extreme lows. And unfortunately, she killed herself on an impulse. She probably would have survived, an hour later she probably wouldn't have done it, because she was this intensity, this intensity between the low and the dark, the high and the low is what creates art. This is why I'm against people who are probably on, medication to stop them feeling bad all the time, SSRIs and Prozac and so on, because if you look at art, so much of it, all the great art of the world has been created from being down here and trying to get back up. Why do you think they call Black African music the blues? And the blues is also a term for I'm feeling down. I got the blues. That was the African American struggle, the coming out, and this is why I think I'm not sounding like an old man now, but I'm saying that I don't think the pop music in the charts today is as good, the rock music as it was 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. I don't think the movies are as good today as they used to be. They rely too heavily on special effects and things like that. I think movies were much better years ago. I think even art and painting was much better. What was in the galleries was better years ago, even long before my time. I think that was because people were learning were using their struggle inside them to create like beautiful art. And that beautiful art remains with us forever, because when we see something, we see a poem or a painting or a song that really gets you here. What you're hearing is someone's struggle, and you know what? It's our struggle as well. So we're going to take a break out. Okay, we're going to take a short break.